delighted to say that I'm in conversation with Coral Rumble, author of Little Light. Now, Coral, you've worked for many years as a poet and a performer, and you featured on CBeebies, and you've written 3 poetry collections, and you contributed to about, I don't know, probably over 200 anthologies for children. Yeah. Michael Rosen has said that Coral has a dash and a delight about her work. So that's a great accolade. But Little Light, we want to talk about perhaps today, delivers everything that a good story needs. It's got laughter, it's got tension, it's got tears, it's got loss, it's got hope, which I think we all need in life, don't we? So the story is about Ava, whose family has fallen into difficulty. The language of poetry keeps the story flowing, which I think is so nice. And the topics woven within all of that story, you know, they're quite challenging. So the book, I think, can have some big conversation, or start those big conversations with children as the story sort of deals with the difficulty of a big theme: homelessness, abusive kind of situations, problems at school, and the ups and downs of friendship. I mean, these are all things that we can all relate to. And I really think the book offers hope, love, sympathy, empathy, so that perhaps traumatized children, or not even traumatized kids, can enjoy the story and realize that life is full of ups and downs, but, you know, we all come out the other side of it. So without further ado, thank you for joining me. Congratulations on your Spark School Award.
Thank you.
Tell us about your journey. How did this all begin?
Well, I started my working life as a teacher, an English teacher in a big, some of us escape.
Yes, we do.
But teachers ask me in schools how to escape. I started off in a big comprehensive school as an English teacher, and then I left to have our first. We've got 2 children who are very grown up now, and we've got grandchildren as well. But I gave up when I had Charlie, our daughter, I was always writing, but I hadn't thought it was a realistic option for a career. But my husband was the one. He was saying, send stuff off, see if it gets published. And I was like, no, well, everyone says it's so difficult. I just love doing it. And he said, look, this is your moment. We're used to one salary. And there are lots of people who would love to write, but they just can't afford to give themselves the time. And so it started there, and I was actually writing for adults at the time and doing some sort of performance stuff at festivals. And I always say that I became, if you do, a poet job-wise in 92. I'm getting on a bit. That's when
my son was born, so I like
is it? Yeah. Well, it's a festival booked me, asked me if I do 10 minutes on this really good stage, and said they would pay me 100 quid and put me in a hotel. And I thought, word, someone's taking me seriously.
Yes, I'm a real person, performer, writer.
And then I thought, well, if I want to do this as a job, school is the place for me, because I'm used to education. And school life, and so I started to write more for children, and that really took over because things started to get published in anthologies, mainly due to a wonderful poet, John Foster, who really took me on board and was pushing me to all the other editors. And it started slowly and happily it grew as the kids grew. So it was doable. It was doable.
More organic in that sense. Which is nice, isn't it? And really more sort of enjoyable, I suppose. I hope you enjoyed the journey of that. So tell us then now what led up to Little Light, and tell us about it. Who's it for? What you want readers to get from it?
Age-wise, it's categorized as 10 plus. It's about a girl called Ava who becomes homeless. Her dad walks out on her and her mum when he finds out that her mum's expecting twins, And of course, as he goes, he was very abusive anyway, and there are hints of this throughout. So they get moved to a hotel, and they get stuck in this hotel for quite a while. And she has to leave her primary school where she was in the last term of year 6, which is the pits,
honestly, such an important time in a child's life.
And then she has to join a new school, and she starts to get bullied because she lives in a hotel, and she's unhappy, and the twins are born, and of course that really takes her mum's attention, and they're in this one little room in the hotel. And it's about that, mainly about that summer. It's the last term of primary, the summer holidays, and the first term of secondary school. And she kind of comes into her own by the end of that first term, having gone through lots of unjust situations and bullying. But she comes through to the other side. So that's vaguely the story.
Do you want kids to read it on their own? Do you want them to read it with their parents, or sounds a fantastic book for schools as well? And what is what do you want them to get from reading it, really?
I think it depends on the child. Some children read it on their own.
Yes.
And one of the loveliest things I had was a parent contacting me on social media to say that her friend contacted me first and said, I want to buy this book for my friend's daughter because they're going through a terrible situation. Dad has gone, and Dad has completely disappeared from the girl's life. And she said, and the little girl has said that in the books she reads, sometimes it seems like in most books Dad is still around, even though they've split up, and she felt that didn't reflect her situation. And so so I sent this book, and then the mum got back and said thank you. I won't say her name, but my daughter felt like it. She told me she felt it was written for her.
Wow.
So sometimes it's individual children, but it can be very useful in the classroom too.
For compassion, as well.
Oh, yeah.
Compassion of different circumstances. We live in a very divisive world.
Yeah.
And I won't get political on you, but it's wonderful that there are people addressing these tough, very tough actually situations.
Yeah.
But coming through them eventually, and that's what I think is wonderful, that sense of, yes, it's challenging, yes, it's traumatic, and yes, it's very difficult, but there is hope at the end of the tale, which I think is really important. I mean, tell us about your own experiences of your childhood, perhaps. Is it woven perhaps a little bit into the narrative with Ava?
It is. Ava isn't me. She comes from a very different sort of cultural heritage. But it doesn't matter what cultural heritage you come from, we have similar experiences, and we have similar emotions and baggage from some of the things that we go through. And when I was very young, I was still at infant school, things went terribly wrong for my dad, and we lost everything. And we didn't end up living in a hotel, but we moved in with my grandparents. And they had a small house. We were in one double bedroom. So there was mum and dad's bed. I was next to it. My brother was down the bottom. This went on for 2 or 3 years. It was cramped. It was very difficult. My grandmother was not to be argued with. And I think mum had lots of trouble in wanting to still be a mum in a home where another woman was in charge,
and that set and a sense of shame perhaps, and a little bit of loss of
my dad definitely he did not become an alcoholic as Ava's dad did, but he he worked every hour on all sorts of jobs and was never at home because he was so guilty about the situation we were in. And so there are certain poems that are direct experiences of mine that I've given to Ava. That she comes into the hotel room at one point, and her mum's kneeling on the floor crying because all the crockery they stuck, they sort of stacked high, had fallen onto the floor and smashed, and she's complaining about there's no room for all this, and it's directly related to we'd actually moved out of Nan's house into a council house, and Mum had one of these old sort of chests with glass at the front with all your wedding gifts in. Never ever used. Yes. And one day that she did something and it toppled over. And but things with Dad were difficult at that time. I mean, their marriage in the end was wonderful, but at this time it was tough. And she was there picking pieces up, and I remember just picking them up with her and crying with her. And I knew, even though I was a little girl, I knew she was crying about more than the breakage.
Yes, it's a profound cry.
Yeah. So I gave that experience to Ava.
Gosh, deep, isn't it? I mean, that's the joy, isn't it? Even when I write, you interweave real and make believe and different experiences or people's stories actually, but there is an authenticity about the book from that as well, and it doesn't have to be all about you, but I was interested in that, like you just said, that moment, and therefore it was almost, I suppose, was it cathartic to even write it into the story?
It was. I wrote it during lockdown, the first lockdown, and I wrote it really quickly in about 2.5 months, and but it was like it was ready to come out. And I'd been wait, because I visit schools and do workshops. I knew I needed a good amount of time to just go in and with this idea and just go straight with it. And so lockdown provided that for me. So it and it was cathartic. And you know, Mum and Dad and I, we came, and my brother, we came through the other side of difficulty, came out the other side. We never talked about it until I wrote Little Light.
Really?
Yeah, we'd never
really. God.
Yeah, I think we just it was weird, because I'd say we all had a good relationship and we're close family, but it's like it was the
elephant in the room almost. Is it?
Yeah, it was like the dark part of our life that nobody really wanted to revisit. And so we started to talk about it when I wrote Little Light, because I thought, I need to tell Mum and Dad I'm writing this. I don't want them to read it and say, this is familiar. I know where some of these ideas have come from. And it was good. It was lovely that we had that opportunity, because Dad died last year, Mum died this year. And so it was lovely that we had a couple of years of being able to talk about it freely without
and process it almost. No blame or judgment, but it's always because you know what it's like. Mental health and well-being for me, it's all about expressing it in a healthy way, in a healthy place, and so that's very healing actually, and you can feel that sense of release, can you, from some of that now? So that's interesting. So why do you think it was important to write a book in sort of poetic form? I'm very interested in that. What was it about the verse novel that appealed to you?
Well, I love verse novels, and when it came to lockdown, and I thought about, I'm actually going to have time now to get to grips with this. I immediately thought of the verse novels that I'd read, and I thought, that's probably the best way to tell this story. Verse novels are really useful. They get rid of a lot of detail, get right to the heart in a series of poems. Basically, you're telling a story in slices of important moments of that story. So you get rid of all the periphery, you get straight to the point each time. And one slice, obviously, as the writer, you try to make sure that it can link in some way to the next slice of the story. And it also, with a verse novel, you can choose a lot of the time you're writing in free verse, but you can choose more structured forms for different parts of the story. And so there are certain verse forms that are just right for a kind of moment. Like I wrote a poem when Ava's on half term, and it's called October Morning, and they're in a council house. Then they've been rehoused, and the dog she makes friends with, called Travis, Irish setter, but he was very little. She got him, and he grew very big. She's now allowed to keep him. And in October Morning, I wrote a villanelle because it's a nice. She's in bed with Tracker, plonked on the bed with his legs in the air, and she's happy because it's the beginning of half term, and she's just there lazing with Tracker. And so the villanelle, because it's quite a relaxed form, and there's almost a hypnotic of repeating rhyme and lines, and it was just the ideal moment for her lazing in bed with her dog. So I wrote it.
I can identify with that moment.
Yeah, I know.
But also that feeling I remember when, as a former teacher as well, oh gosh, half term, how lovely. We've got this whole week where we don't really have to be rushing about. So magic moment, actually, isn't it? And the dog is important, isn't it, for her too?
The dog's very important because he starts to follow her one day. She thinks it's the bullies that are following her, but then she looks around and she sees this little brown dog. And when she gets back to the hotel, she looks out of the window because she loses him, and he's outside. He's tracked her there, which is why she calls him Tracker. And then he just turns up at different random times. So he's obviously a stray too, and this is the important thing of Tracker. He's also a stray. He's homeless. There are little bits in it that I've written to indicate, just again a whisper, that he may have known abuse as a dog. And in my backstory, in my head, Tracker he's escaped from a puppy farm. And so if Ava puts her arms up, he cowers. And he doesn't like it if she shouts. So he's known violence too. And so they end up,
bonding,
going through life together. Bonding and going through life together. So
very interesting, isn't it? I love that whisper, as you say, because it's not in your face, pushed, it's gentle, but it's there. And you can pick up the nuances of it. Tell us a bit more about Mr. Amir.
Mr. Amir is lovely. He's so many shopkeepers I have met in London. He has been in this country since he was a boy. This is my backstory for him. And it's a family business. It's a grocery shop that he runs. And he's got a big old green van with his, the name on the side, and he's the kindest man. He lives near to where Ava has moved to, and he will always have time for her. And he lets her go into the shop. Sometimes he lets her serve customers, and he's just there for her all the time. And when she goes to school and starts the new school, the secondary school, obviously she's still concerned because the same bullies from primary school are going to the same school as her. And he writes her a little limerick. It's about jelly beans, because he gives her jelly beans. He's always got jelly beans to give out to kids, and Ava gets a fair few jelly beans in her time. So he writes it for her, and he says that she can take it to school because it will keep her company. And and he's just a very, very kind man, and he's the one who at one stage, Nana is really, really important in the book. Ava's Nana is the backbone of the family. She's the one who's always there for them as a family. And after one particular difficult time, when Ava runs away from home for a short period, she goes to Nana's, and which she loves because everything's familiar, all the things Nana does, and it's stuff that makes her feel relaxed. And Mr. Amir gives her a lift there in his van, smelling of cabbages, and he's just a delightful friend to her.
It's just lovely. That's the love, isn't it, that surrounds her from that. You know, that gentle, practical love, which is what we all need in difficult times. You know, I'm interested then, children reading this, what's the hope that they get from taking it? I mean, is there even a theme, do you think, around that transition from primary to secondary as well? Could that be something that could be explored?
It's definitely a transition book. I know some schools have used it for transition sort of processes that they go through. Because there are lots of things. You don't have to be in Ava's position to be fearful about going to school.
No, because I write a lot about that, actually, and talk to a lot of parents about that transition. Some kids sail along. Some children find it very difficult. And in fact, in my own personal transition, I was bullied in my secondary school because there were a whole new load of people. And I wasn't particularly assertive at 11. So I'm kind of interested in that transition. It doesn't always go swimmingly for people.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It is kind of about that transition time. I think it's good in that it makes Ava is very aware that she is being bullied, but she does find a strength in her to at one point stick up for someone else who was actually one of her bulliers. When he's being bullied, there's a character called Theo, and his little crew of friends who are the persecutors of Ava, really. They find out that his name is Theophilus, and they think it's a funny name. So they start to tease him about that, and Ava is the one who comes to his rescue, and so there's strength in Ava that perhaps she didn't realize was,
and compassion for somebody else.
Compassion, and in fact, one of the biggest bullies, Shafiq, near the end of the book, it's clear that he's not having an easy time, and he and Ava do become friends. There are lots of different themes that woven.
Well, there are. It's very, you can take what you will from it, can't you? There's a whole load of things, and you can come back to it and read it again and actually get something else from it as well. So let's talk about your other books, though, as well. Tell us a bit more about Breaking the Rules, or some of the other things that you've written.
Well, Breaking the Rules is one of my very first books. Preachers, Teachers and Family Features was my first book.
Right.
So there are five poetry books out there, but the more recent ones are Riding a Lion and Things That Should Be in a Poem. So Riding a Lion is Key Stage 2, and I say Things That Should Be in a Poem is Key Stage 1, but lots of Key Stage 2 teachers dip into it. Poetry is a bit like that, it's hard to pin it to an age unless there's something very obviously for preschool.
It's fluid, isn't it? When you read with children, you can read other things too. I mean, that's like the Very Worried Lunchbox.
Oh, that's a blast from the past. Yeah, that's about a lunchbox being left in a school hall and getting a bit worried and uptight.
I love that though, that concept. It must have appealed to me as a former deputy head. I went, oh God, can you imagine that from a perspective?
I know.
So yeah, so where can people find all your lovely books? Where can they buy them? Where they can explore more about
really, anywhere they can. I mean, there's obviously the big juggernaut Amazon, but any bookshop will be able to, if they haven't got anything of mine on the shelves, they can they'll order in for you.
Just put in your name, really. Yeah. And of course you're in the Sue Atkins Book Club, so people are going to get to know of you that way and spread it that way too. What are your social media handles, as they call them, I think?
Twitter, it's Rumble Coral. Yeah, I'm having to think now. It's Coral Rumble on Facebook too. I tend to keep Facebook more for just personal stuff. I do put stuff on there about my work as well, but only things that I think my sort of more personal friends will be interested in.
Yes.
I tend to use Twitter and Twitter mainly, really, for
we all have favorite ones, don't we? I mean, as you know, one of my favorite is Twitter. I just get it. And Instagram sometimes because of visuals and different things. LinkedIn is another place actually that I share. So when this is live, I'll be sharing it all across my different platforms, of course. But listen, it's been a real joy and a real privilege, and it's lovely to see you and get to know you. And I do highly recommend all of your books, but this one in particular is a beautifully written book, and I think people will enjoy reading it alone or together, and it will start those big conversations, I think, that we all need to perhaps have, and teach hope and compassion. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Sue. Thank you.